Next, we've got Dave Mann. Now, Dave Mann is not only a fellow evangelist, but a great friend of mine. We've known each other for 47 years. An amazing guy. He's doing an incredible work in New Zealand, doing some huge national projects. And he's going to be talking about church culture. Now, if you're a pastor listening to this, I would really encourage you to stay to the end. And if you are an evangelist, I would encourage you to get the hold of the recording of this, which will be available after it processes at the end of the day, and send it to your pastor, because this is a terrific session that every pastor and every evangelist should see. So looking forward to the session. Dave Mann, over to you.
Great. Kia ora, everybody. G'day, everyone. So my name's Dave Mann. I hail from a small town in New Zealand called Hawera. But these days, I'm living in a city called Tauranga. Married to Heather. We've got 4 boys, aged 16 down through 8. And my topic today is to look at pastors in relation to evangelism. Now, for myself, following a theological training, I had about 8 years in outreach ministry. But then I transferred and moved to Singapore, and I became a pastor. And suddenly, from a full-time focus on outreach, I now had to do more holistic discipleship, and the shoes were very much on the other feet. Quite a story unfolded. I thought, okay, we've got to make sure that the members of the church are going to be evangelistic. And so I began to do evangelism trainings, and the problem is the hard-hearted members didn't turn up. So the second year, I did the same, and again, the members didn't turn up. And so I thought, okay, is there something wrong with the members of the church, or could I look in the mirror and maybe there's something wrong with me? What if it's me who's responsible to make the mission of God's church the mission of the people that I'm given responsibility to lead? Because surely the leader of every organization has to authentically, measurably, and observably make the mission of the organization the mission of the organization. And then it occurred to me, why do we do evangelism training through seminars if I control a pulpit? So I decided to take the outreach equipping and to put it through the pulpit instead. But I quickly realized that what I taught resulted in very little 3 or 4 weeks later. And so the question then came, okay, how would I actually sustain this now that I've got the pastor's shoes on? And out of that came what I'm about to show you, which we simply call the outreaching culture strategy. It's the most effective thing in outreach that I have ever touched, and even since then, 9 years as a pastor. Back here in New Zealand, I was a pastor in Singapore, back in New Zealand now for 12 years. And despite the things we've done here, some of which have been large scale, I have to say I have never been as excited as I was when I got to year 5 as a pastor, and I want to explain to you why. The key to mobilizing members isn't just to train them and give them content. The key is to disciple them. And when we look at the Great Commission, Jesus, we're told in the latter part of that we're not just to teach Jesus' teachings, we're to teach them to obey Jesus' teachings. It's about results. All discipleship is supposed to be result-oriented. And so I worked out that if I was going to mobilize the members, it had to go beyond a program. I had to actually build an outreaching culture. This had to be authentically who we actually were. And so how would you build an outreaching culture? I'm going to share some slides with you, and please excuse me each time as I click a couple of buttons to do that. I worked out that there were a number of different patterns that I'd have to build. And just to give you an illustration, by the way, imagine a pizza. The base of the pizza is the culture. The toppings are the programs. Every church has got programs. Every church's programs and flavor will be different. But the base, the culture of the church, is supposed to be authentically about the mission that Jesus has given us. And that's the responsibility of the pastor and of the small group leaders and of the youth leaders. To mobilize the members, I worked out, number one, they've got to be motivated. Like Jesus saw the crowds and his heart was filled with compassion in Matthew chapter 9. I'm going to have to equip them so they know how to engage someone in a conversation, and in particular, someone they might fundamentally disagree with on lots of matters. It's about conversational skills. I'm going to need to kind of reinforce that though, because if they just hear it, statistically people remember about 10% of what they hear, 40% of what they say, 60 to 70% of what they do. But I'll also have to remind them, because a month later they've probably forgotten. Let's say we teach 3 great questions to turn a conversation. What do you mean by that? Where'd you get that idea from? Have you considered? Well, a month later, they've forgotten, unless I say, hey, everybody, what were those 3 great questions? And I do the same a week later and a week later, a month later and a month later, 3 months later and 6 months later, every single 6 months for the rest of the time I'm in ministry. And then Modeling, they're going to have to see what it's like, and testimony, of course, is a part of that, and preaching can be. And finally, with consistency. Now, what I'm going to show you is all on a website for free, alltogether.co.nz. That's ALL, alltogether.co.nz. If you click on leaders, there's a big drop down, but just click the page and there is the consulting page. And if you scroll down, there are 4 videos, because having been a pastor and what happened, I came back and worked with 63 churches for a few years to see if they could implement the same principles. I learned from that, then in 2016 created this very simplified package, 4 videos and resources to help churches adopt the principles. The introductory video is for a leadership team like an elders board. The next video is what we're looking at, and this is a strategy for pastors to build an outreaching culture with a diagram and resources we'll look at soon. There's then a strategy for the small group as to how they could amplify what the pastor is seeking to do through the church small groups. And finally, the conversational approach. The content isn't just how to share the gospel, because if I share that with a colleague, what am I supposed to talk about the next day? The content is how to engage people every day and in every way to help them take steps toward Jesus. And on some occasions, it might involve the gospel. On many occasions, I would hope it would involve various dynamics or aspects of the gospel. But this curriculum part, as I found through experience with churches, was quite important to see this whole thing work. So we're going to come back to this diagram and then the resources. So we've got our principles, and the question is, how could this be made easy for a busy pastor to add, you could say, to everything that they already do? To motivate, equip, reinforce, remind, model with consistency, to build a culture of evangelism, not just a set of programs. And the answer is in the habits that we embrace. Culture isn't built through programs, culture is built through habits. So if we look here, we have a calendar. Motivate, equip, reinforce, remind, model with consistency. Consistency is achieved in that we're now looking at habits to embrace every year as church leaders. And we could motivate, catch the pattern through what we already do with no extra work by becoming intentional. We motivate through the pulpit at the beginning of each quarter. The 12 weeks ahead, we cast vision for the opportunities and the outreach programs of the church, outreach through small group, individual efforts, and participation with wider efforts. We can then equip through sermons. Every year it's the mission of the church. Why have an evangelism seminar if we're not first preaching our outreach equipping through our pulpits, so that the main person through the main platform is making the main thing the main thing? The main person is the pastor, the main platform is the pulpit, and the main thing is the mission of the church. With that equipping then taken, members remember 10%, like I said before, of what they hear, 40% of what they say, 70% of what they do. We get our small groups, and this is what I did in Singapore. I made the small groups discuss the sermon with a study I prepared for them every time I spoke about the Great Commission, so that it was reinforced and they're practicing, increasing the retention. But how are we going to deal with the forgetfulness? I worked out that I needed a platform that would remind me every month as the pastor to reinforce key things that were taught. And monthly testimonies were just perfect for that. A monthly testimony inspires, it refocuses. You get Janice up and she shares the story of how she engaged a conversation with the hope of inspiring someone toward faith. And whether or not she was successful actually isn't relevant. We have to celebrate what we want to see repeated in our congregations. We want people to initiate conversations with a motive of encouraging faith, and that's what she was doing. So after it, there's energy in the room because she's just tried something and everyone's proud of her. And so you stand up as pastor and say, Janice, outstanding. Everyone, did you notice how she started her conversation? She told us with a question. You remember our pulpit series 6 months ago? The key to great conversations is what? That's right. The key to great conversations is great questions. And can anyone for this Morrow Bar tell me what were the 3 great questions to turn a conversation? And suddenly something you've taught, what do you mean by that? Where'd you get that idea from? Have you considered? Is being reinforced and reminded to the congregation to go into long-term memory. Finally, we preach the gospel itself so that we're modeling through our preaching as well as through our own testimonies and stories. And a key point to point out here is that what I've just presented to you is no more work to do than not to do. Because this is about building culture, which is done through habits, not through just programs. And everything that I've put to you can exist within what we already do each week as pastors. To bounce back briefly to my face, the results of what happened. We started with 35 people. Within 5 years, we got to 300 people. We went from 4 small groups to 23 small groups. And the most exciting thing ever for me in outreach in my life would have to be that period of time when the culture was really there. I have to say there's another story. I wasn't able to protect the culture because that was beyond my power to do. But going to leaders' meetings with the small group leaders each month, and different ones had to give reports on things that had happened. And here they are. We had another person come to faith, and they tell the story of how it happened. And this small group had another 2 people who came to faith. We had reached this point where outreach was part of their culture. The intuition for how to connect and engage in conversation, to invite to small group social activities, to bring that into a community environment. It was all humming without me having to do anything. You see, my first 8 years of ministry were all about what I did. They were about me creating opportunities wherever I could, engaging with principals and schools and classrooms and assemblies, with youth groups and inter-youth group activities, and then with wider inter-church community activities. But when I became a pastor, my key role changed from being someone who does evangelism to become someone whose primary role is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry so that they are mobilized, Ephesians 4. And the way to do that was through the habits. And it was the most exciting thing, genuinely, I've ever touched. Okay, so let's go back, and I want to show you where some resources are for this so that you have plenty that you're able to go on with to look at afterward. Back at the website, altogether.co.nz, the question is, how would we make this easy for a pastor who's been through a whole theological training that never taught them habit-based leadership approaches to build culture? Instead, they're taught theology and things they should preach and maybe how to run various program ideas. Well, here's the resources that can make applying the habits really easy. Click on Leaders, the consulting page, scroll down to the diagram, and underneath there are a myriad of resources now created to support churches who embrace this. First of all, the Sermon Outlines and Studies, if you click, takes you to a web page where there are outreach equipping sermon series, conversations in a hostile environment, teamwork makes the dream work, everyday spiritual conversations, evangelism in the Holy Spirit. On the second line, conversations that connect, gospel equipping, preparing the nets. All of these are 4-week or 6-week long sermon series. They come with Word documents that give you your sermon outlines and notes. They come with matching small group discussion guides, and they come, many of them, with PowerPoints and graphic design with no branding and no copyright. Suddenly, equipping your members each year through the pulpit has been made easy. Back at the resource page, click Equipping Videos, and you come to a collection of various equipping series. The first 2, though, are Because We Care for adults, God Talk for youth. So if we click Because We Care, this has been one of our most effective resources to help pastors. It's a collection of 16 5-minute videos about the conversational skills of Jesus. You can see a range of titles there: how to start a conversation, how to share the gospel, the power of prayer, disciples not converts, conversations move at the speed of trust, avoiding the quotable quote. And if you scroll down, there's the videos, and 5 minutes long is short enough to play during the offering time in a church, which is what many hundreds, if not more than 1,000 churches here in New Zealand have done with these. But they can also be given to a small group, and if you click the red circle there, here, you find there's a discussion guide all ready for your church small group. Second page of this discussion guide there with some notes. Back under equipping videos, if we go through and click the youth resource, godtalk.nz, is a website created to support a vision which is articulated in those 4 red circles, which includes outreach equipping resources and leadership training for youth leaders. Now, the challenge of youth outreach is that youth leaders change on average every 2 years. So if I'm the pastor of a church, I'm responsible to get the small group leaders actively involved in their part of creating an outreaching culture. And that's through the links. If you go back to the previous web page, you'll find a whole lot of resources for that. But what about the youth leader who changes every 2 years? The fact is, I'll need to meet with them and to make sure they have some basic training on how to lead and build an outreaching culture, and to know that I expect them to do outreach equipping every single year. So, outreach equipping. We click it and we discover a collection of videos. Again, lots of titles: how to start a conversation, how to start a normal conversation, avoiding the quotable quote. And next to them, again, there are discussion guides, nice and simple, So the young youth leader can bring good substance and quality training to their youth group. But also, if we go back and click the leadership training, there's an amazing collection of 12 videos created by this group of youth leaders and young adult leaders, 3 of whom are also teachers, so they understand educational theory. And this series of 5-minute videos can train the leader. That's 1 hour of video. Click under each video, you've got notes and also a discussion guide. And the whole point of this, beyond what's on screen right now, which is that it's no more work to do than not to do, is that the young youth leader can then come in, and I'm the pastor, and I say, please go watch this 1 hour video. Come tell me what you've learned. And he comes back and he tells me. And then I say, I expect you to equip, there's the videos. And then the youth leader chooses their own group to raise up as leaders, plays the 5-minute videos, 10 minutes discussion, 15 minutes only. They're beginning to give quality content, and everybody's game is being lifted. Not to run outreach programs only, but to build an outreaching culture. It's about the pizza base, and then we add the toppings. For our last few comments with the time that we've got, the main person through the main platform has to make the main thing within the main thing the main thing. The main person is the pastor. The main platform is the pulpit. The main thing is the mission, but the main thing within the main thing is the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry. Pastors, small group leaders, youth leaders, your job is to equip the saints. They will not thrive, many of them, in outreach if they don't have help from us. Our job's to create the culture. And here's the beauty of it. The evangelists then come along and we invite them to be the guest speaker. We invite them to run some Saturday seminars, and guess what? Instead of walking into an environment that's evangelistically dry and they build something up and there's some excitement and it fades away a few weeks later, they walk into an environment that is evangelistically passionate and visionary and active, with members engaging conversations, with regular testimonies, with equipping and training. And suddenly the expertise of the evangelist, the great piece of salami on the top of my pizza, like a program, but suddenly that salami is making all the difference to the pizza, because with the culture established, the pizza's hurled together. It's a pizza. Without the culture, you've just got yourself a mess. I encourage that building culture for a church leader is a long-term vision instead of a short-term vision, but it's far more rewarding and it will bring far more fruit. And that's really all I think I have to say. I'm happy to finish early. Altogether.co.nz, you'll find all of those resources. I've done plenty of things in evangelism throughout the 30 years that I've been full-time in ministry. My heart is for the gospel from the day I came to faith in the teenage years. And there's been nothing more exciting than when I was a pastor and able to build a culture. It took 5 years to build. It's fruitful, it can be done, and it can be done through what we already do on a weekly basis as church leaders. Father, I ask that you would bless the pastors, the elders board members, the youth leaders, and the small group leaders who are watching this, that they would be able to engage now with these resources, that they would be able to make them their own, that they would be able to bring intentional equipping to their members through their pulpits, through their small groups, through testimony, and by other means, that the outreaching temperature of all churches would grow and that more people would know you. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dave. There was so much in that, and I hope that if you've seen that session, you'll get along to the website and have a look at those resources. Now, you probably think that there's a massive sign-up cost for that, because there's so much work gone into those resources, but there isn't. It's all completely free. It's been done to help enable you and your church to create a church culture of outreach, an outreaching church culture. So get along to altogether.co.nz and have a look at those resources. And thanks again, Dave. That was absolutely inspiring. And that strategy is working so well in churches. And every church, it doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen over time. Culture changes. And so, yeah, I'd get a hold of those resources and I would, implement them in your church.